On this video, I'm going to talk to you about how you can take one long form piece of content, like a podcast episode or a long form YouTube video, and turn it into like 25, 30, 50 plus pieces of other content. Maybe give you some ideas and spark some thoughts on how you can actually utilize this content to bring more marketing awareness to your brand and your business. Okay, we're going to start with the basics and we're going to get a little bit more advanced. But the awesome thing about this is that the advanced stuff isn't all that much complicated. So we're going to be dissecting these things. Literally what I'm going to do is I'm going to rattle off a list of items that you can kind of create from a long form podcast episode. Let's say, for example, you got on a podcast episode, or even I got on a podcast episode, and here's how I would do it. Or maybe you had somebody on as a guest and you want to recreate some of their content and the assets that you created with them for their purposes or whatever. Now, a lot of times this is a great idea to help kind of bring a lot of awareness to your podcast. And what I'm going to be talking about are things that aren't going to take a whole lot of effort or man hours. It's going to take a little bit of time, like let's say maybe 1 to 2 hours worth of work to be able to create all the stuff I'm talking about. And a lot of it does depend on how intense you want to get with each pieces of these. But you can take these assets, send them off to your guest and say like, hey, here's a bunch of stuff that you can utilize. Go post this elsewhere. But then also you could post it yourself and that sort of thing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take an example and just say like, I have been on a 60-minute podcast episode where they interviewed me about content, social media marketing, podcast, YouTube, that kind of stuff. And here's how I'm going to utilize it. So obviously it's kind of cheating, but that episode is going to be my first piece of content. So that's one piece of content that's going to go out and have like some really good reach and that sort of thing as the core episode. Now here's where we start getting a little creative. And this is kind of the basic stuff that most people kind of know about at this point. The next thing I would do is take that and then chop out social media clips from that. Now there's a whole slew of ways that you can do this. And I have a whole nother video on this on how you can juice out social media content from long form content. But the simple things is you could create things like clips from CapCut, from Opus Clip. They do like automatic, so they'll transcribe your episode, your core video, and then basically go clip out little clips from your episode automatically, and then you can, edit those as needed or whatever. The only thing I don't like about that is currently sometimes it doesn't clip out really good clips, even if you give it good prompts. So the way I like to have myself or my editors do this is that we'll take the transcription from that episode, throw it into ChatGPT, and we have a prompt that says something to the effect of, I need 5 social media clips from this episode that have high value, that start with a good hook and end with a good call to action and don't leave any cliffhangers. And we need them to be under 60 seconds. Then ChatGPT does a good job of time stamping those clips for us, going through and actually dissecting like what makes sense and, putting together some really good clips that we can pull. So then my editors will go directly to those timestamps, pull those clips, and then edit away. And that's a really good way to do it if you still want to kind of stick with the manual thing. But the evolution of AI has really helped with being able to actually pull good clips so that you're not having to kind of like scrub through the episode and hope that you find a really good clip, which is kind of the way we had to do it up until about 1.5 years ago. So this has been a really big game changer in terms of pulling clips. The next thing that you could do is you could take that podcast episode and again, let's say it's a 60-minute podcast episode. There's probably at least anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 segments where you might go for 5 to 15 minutes talking about a particular subject. Now you can take that, clip out that segment, and completely recreate and reproduce that as its own YouTube video. Now treat it as its own YouTube video, meaning you're going to give it a custom thumbnail, you're going to give it a custom title. Like don't say this is episode 501, like just give it the title as is, like make sure it's SEO driven and that sort of thing. Create the descriptions with the timestamps and all that stuff. Like treat it like it's literally its own YouTube content and did not get clipped from a podcast episode. It is a good opportunity at that point to be able to link back to that podcast episode in full. And maybe at the end of the video, you could give like a little slide that says, to listen to the full episode, go here or click the link below. And then you have the end screen pop up and then there's the video of the full episode. So it's a good way to kind of create an inception. And that's a lot of what this stuff is going to kind of entail is you could obviously leave all this stuff as its own content piece, but you can also drive it backwards and forwards to wherever you want people to go. So if you have those social media clips at the end, you could give a call to action that says, click the link in my bio to go listen to the full episode. And that's a good way to drive traffic, right? Which is ultimately a lot of what this is meant for. So that's a good way to do it. Is I think a lot of people miss the opportunity. Like it's a no-brainer to be able to chop out social media clips from long form, but what about mid long form from long form content? That's a really good way to do it recreate it as its own YouTube content and publish it out there like that. Another really good idea is actually to create another podcast episode, even for your own podcast from that. Now, obviously at this point, I would get permission from the podcast host that you were, making an appearance on, but take little segments, just like the YouTube videos, take those, strip out the audio, maybe even hop on and do a quick intro clip where you're saying like, hey guys, this was a really good segment for 15 minutes that we talked about this. And I really wanted to put this out on my podcast because it was high value and I want to make sure it gets to my podcast audience. So enjoy listening. And then boom, you have the clip. This helps to not have to recreate a new podcast episode. I actually do this every once in a while with my stuff where I'll actually strip the YouTube video and then throw it into my podcast because it's relevant to my podcast audience and that sort of thing. So that's another really good, easy way to do that. And you can do that repetitively if you want to, however much you can juice it out. Now from here, we're going to start getting into more like strategic stuff. So a lot more written content as well. And the next thing I would recommend doing is you could take the full video and do this, but you could also take the segments or the social media clips. We do this a lot with social media clips where we'll take them, get them transcribed, throw that transcription in ChatGPT, and then ask it to give us a good, well thought out written post. And we have some parameters. We'll say, make sure it has a good hook, make sure it doesn't have any emojis in it, make sure it has a good call to action at the end, make sure it's value driven, has steps and that sort of thing. And then ChatGPT will do a good job of giving us a written post that we can put out there. And sometimes those kind of posts, and even sometimes I'll say like, make sure it doesn't sound like it's coming from AI, make sure it has my voice in it or whatever. Then, sometimes ChatGPT with those prompts is actually going to give you a very, very good strategic post that you could put out there. And then it's going to get a lot of traffic driving towards whatever you're driving it towards. So that's a good way to do it without you having to go into and kind of recreating a written piece by yourself. The next phase of that is obviously now you can craft that into an email piece copy that's going to go out. You could, if you have an email list, and then you have ChatGPT design a whole separate kind of formatting for the email as well, and then push people back to the core podcast episode. And that's like a really good way. We actually do that with several people right now. And it's a very, very easy process and literally takes seconds sometimes to do. Now, a few other things is where you can start getting even more creative is thanks to like platforms like NotebookLM or even ChatGPT, and there's several others that can do this, is you can now take these episodes and turn them into almost mini courses or study guides without much work. So you could literally throw this into NotebookLM, like the transcription of the full podcast episode, and then have it create like a cheat sheet or a guide or like a study course or a quiz. Like it'll actually be able to create those things. And then you can publish those as lead hooks or free resources that people can actually sign up for to drop back into your email list. And it's a really good way to do that. The next phase of that is ultimately like now you can create a book. So the book that I created, the REI marketing book from my podcast, was actually principally the same way that I'm talking about, except back 4 years ago when I did this, I wasn't able to utilize AI because it really didn't exist at that point. So a lot of it had to be manual. But the idea is to take that podcast transcription, have ChatGPT write out literally a full-blown book, and then create that into an actual physical book that you can hand out to people at events, or you could do it as a free plus shipping offer. It's a really good way to be able to utilize the content you've already created, especially if you feel good about that, episode that you were on, and then push it back into the hands of people. And it's a really good way to get something like physical into their hands. So in that one, I just gave you a couple of ideas. Create some quizzes, some study guides, stuff like that. That's all going to be able to kind of be broken down into NotebookLM, which we'll do a whole nother video on at some point. You can also have ChatGPT do it as well, but I really like NotebookLM because it'll spit it out specifically in guides or quizzes that people can take in order to retain the knowledge that they just learned from you. From there, now you can also create presentations, or you can actually create even more topics to do more videos on. So you could say, hey, ChatGPT, I did this video, this whole podcast interview. Please break this down into 20 different topics that I could do videos on of things maybe I talked about in the podcast episode. And then it'll spit those ideas out for you, and boom, now you can go back into recording and do some extra videos with that. But then you can do presentations. Like one of the presentations I did recently to a group that I'm a part of was literally stemmed from, there was a podcast episode I was on where they got really strategic with me, and I thought it was a great interview. So I took that and said, turn this into an outline that I can create a presentation from, had ChatGPT create that presentation for me. I cleaned it up a little bit, and boom, now I have a whole nother presentation to be able to give and deliver that has very, very good value, to the point, And I really didn't have to think about it much because I already talked about it. So now there's probably a ton of other ones that I'm missing. So if you have any other thoughts on things that can be created from a long form piece of content, leave that down below. This has grown and evolutionized so quickly over the last year and a half to 2 years since AI has really come to the fold as a very, very commercialized thing. When I first started in the space in this industry, basically it was create content. You clip from podcast episodes, but it's a little bit more of a manual process. Same thing for the content writing and that sort of thing. It's just a lot of manual process, which has now been taken over by the AI process and has helped with creating and curating more valuable, high value driven content. So I love the way it's going. But if you guys want to have more information about this, obviously subscribe to my channel because I talk about this stuff a whole lot and how to create content, utilize it correctly, drive marketing leads, and that sort of thing. But if you haven't already, make sure you have subscribed to the show, and then also leave a comment down below if you have any other ideas on what a 60-minute podcast episode can create from content marketing to something else, whether it's another piece of written form content or another video type or whatever it is. There's a whole lot of ideas that you can go off of in order to be able to get creative and create more content with what you have and not have to create any more than that. And if you haven't already, make sure you have followed me on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Just look for Josh Color. Send me a DM and let me know that you're watching my videos. I would much appreciate that. And if you have any other questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those for you. But other than that, thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.